Hello friends, I'm glad you are here tonight. Imagine you are leaning back, maybe already in bed, and you're ready to drift into another world with me. Before we begin, I want to ask you something simple. Where are you listening from right now, and what time is it in your part of the world? I find it fascinating to imagine how one story can travel across oceans and mountains, reaching people who may be sitting in bright daylight or falling asleep in the quiet of night. So let me take you with me into a journey, because tonight we're going to explore why the Chinese thousands of years ago already seemed to know how to do so many things better than Europe, and how that shaped the rhythm of their daily lives, their food, their entertainment, and even the way they imagine the future. Now, if we step back in time, not to a vague fantasy, but to the real world of early dynasties, we find ourselves standing in bustling streets that do not feel like the Middle Ages of Europe at all. In Europe, you might picture villages made of wood and stone, with smoke rising from small houses, muddy paths, and the scent of livestock clinging to the air. But in China, entire cities were carefully planned, markets were mapped out like grids, and craftsmen specialized in skills that in the West would not appear for centuries. The first striking thing is scale. In the Han Dynasty, which lasted around 2,000 years ago, the population had already grown so large that the Chinese emperors managed vast networks of roads, canals, and even postal routes. Europe at this time had nothing even close to that level of organization. Imagine standing on a busy street in Chang'an, the great capital of the Tang Dynasty centuries later, and you would see thousands of merchants shouting prices, selling silks, ceramics, exotic spices, and paper scrolls filled with poetry. It was not a marketplace of rough barter, but a sophisticated economy where people carried coins, and sometimes even paper money, long before Europeans had ever dreamed of such a thing. And that, in itself, is one of those quiet revolutions that makes you pause. Paper. Think about how powerful it is to be able to write things easily, cheaply, and distribute them. The Chinese invented paper long before Europe even touched the idea. For centuries, Europeans scratched messages on parchment or carved into wood, materials that were expensive and rare. But in China, scholars, poets, and even merchants could write, record, and copy with far greater ease. That meant ideas spread not only among elites but throughout society, which in turn fed innovation, education, and imagination. Imagine walking into a tea house at night, lanterns glowing softly, people sitting with small cups of hot tea, and on the table next to them, a folded scroll of the latest poems circulating through the city. It almost feels like stepping into a cafe of the 19th century in Europe, except this was happening more than 1,000 years earlier. Of course, it wasn't only about ideas. It was also about daily life, the things that make a person wake up in the morning and feel comfort in their routine. Breakfast, for example, would not be a chunk of bread and ale, as you might have in Europe, but rather a bowl of rice porridge flavored with pickled vegetables, or a warm basket of steamed buns filled with meat or bean paste. Sometimes there were noodles, stretched by hand in front of you, steaming in broth, and tea, always tea. While Europeans would still be drinking water that often carried disease, or beer because it was safer, the Chinese were boiling water and steeping leaves, creating a beverage that was not only safer but also carried its own culture of refinement. Drinking tea became not just a habit, but a ritual, a way of expressing elegance and respect, something that would one day charm the entire world. And while they drank tea and read poetry, they also looked up at the sky and charted the stars with a precision that Europe could not match for centuries. Astronomers in China recorded eclipses, tracked comets, and even built elaborate instruments to map the heavens. This wasn't done simply for curiosity, but because the movement of the stars was seen as tied to the fate of the empire itself. The emperor was called the Son of Heaven, and therefore the order of the cosmos reflected directly on his rule. It meant that science and spirituality were woven together in a way that gave scholars both power and responsibility. Compare that to Europe, where astronomy would later clash with the church for centuries, and you can see how different the intellectual climate was. And still, this story is not just about scholars and emperors. Imagine the streets at night, music drifting from an open courtyard, dancers with flowing sleeves moving in circles, acrobats performing somersaults that drew crowds of gasping children. Entertainers in China could become famous, supported by wealthy patrons, and theater flourished long before Shakespeare had written his first play. Masks, elaborate costumes, and music carried stories that spoke to ordinary people as much as nobles. So if you were alive then, after a day of work, you might spend your evening not in silence, but in a lively street theater, sipping wine made from fermented rice, surrounded by friends. It's no wonder travelers from distant lands marveled when they saw it. Marco Polo, centuries later, would describe China as a place of wonders beyond anything in Europe, though many Europeans doubted him, thinking his tales exaggerated. But he was seeing something real, a civilization that had been perfecting technologies, crafts, and institutions for centuries, while Europe was still climbing out of what we call the Dark Ages. To the Chinese, innovation was not rare but constant. They invented the compass, which guided ships long before European explorers set sail. They developed advanced metallurgy, casting iron in ways Europe would not manage until much later. Even their bridges, made with elegant curves and precise engineering, lasted longer and carried heavier loads than many European constructions. So, as we begin this journey together, remember this: the question is not why China was advanced, but how it managed to create an environment where progress flowed steadily, like a river that never dried up. In the following moments, we'll walk deeper into that river, exploring their homes, their markets, their beliefs, and the daily rhythm that made this civilization so remarkable. And as you listen, picture yourself not just as a visitor, but as someone who could sit down at a wooden table in a quiet Chinese courtyard, sipping tea as lanterns swayed gently in the night air, knowing that you were living in a world far ahead of its time. When we look deeper into the world of ancient China, it is not only the grand inventions that impress us, but the texture of daily life itself. Imagine stepping into an ordinary household during the Tang Dynasty, or perhaps the Song Dynasty, which flourished later. The house would not be a dark hut of smoke and dirt floors, but a carefully designed space with courtyards open to the sky, walls decorated with paintings, and furniture arranged in ways that showed an understanding of comfort and harmony. Wooden screens separated rooms, paper windows filtered the light, and the air carried a scent of incense that burned slowly in bronze vessels. There was a rhythm in the way they lived, where even small details reflected larger values of balance, order, and beauty. Meals were central to this rhythm. If in Europe people often ate what they had simply to survive, bread, cheese, perhaps salted meat, in China food was an art, a science, and a joy. Farmers grew not just one staple, but rice in the south, wheat in the north, and countless vegetables in between. Soybeans provided protein, and from them came tofu, soy sauce, and other ingredients that remain central in the world today. Families gathered around low tables, sitting on stools or mats, sharing dishes placed in the center. It was not about each person having their own portion, but about the family taking part in a shared experience, chopsticks passing plates back and forth, laughter rising as tea was poured again and again. To imagine this is to realize that food was not only sustenance, but a binding force of society. And beyond the family meal, the Chinese had already mastered trade in food that traveled far beyond their borders. Spices, fruits, and even new ideas about cuisine spread along the Silk Road. Imagine a caravan loaded with silk bolts, ceramics packed carefully in straw, and jars of sauces and dried goods, moving slowly through the desert, crossing into Central Asia, and eventually making their way toward the Middle East and Europe. When a European noble finally tasted a strange sweet fruit or smelled the fragrance of cinnamon, they were experiencing the distant echo of Chinese trade. And yet, for the Chinese themselves, such variety was part of daily reality. It shows how interconnected their world was centuries before Europe embraced globalization. But daily life was not only about eating. Entertainment carried layers of sophistication that would surprise anyone who believes medieval times were quiet and harsh everywhere. Imagine visiting a bustling urban center at night, walking through a marketplace that never seemed to sleep. Lanterns hung from wooden beams, glowing softly against the night air. Vendors sold roasted chestnuts, dumplings, and candied fruits, while musicians played the pipa or the guqin, instruments whose notes could make crowds stop in wonder. Street performers entertained with juggling, storytelling, and even puppetry. In fact, shadow puppetry became one of the most beloved forms of entertainment, where figures carved from leather were projected onto a screen with a light behind them, creating moving silhouettes that told dramatic tales of gods, heroes, and lovers. These were not just diversions, they were shared cultural experiences, teaching lessons and keeping myths alive across generations. And then there was literature. China produced not just poetry, but novels centuries before Europe would embrace the form. The Song dynasty in particular saw the rise of stories that ordinary people could read and enjoy, tales filled with humor, adventure, and morality. Compare this to Europe, where much of literature was written in Latin, inaccessible to common folk. In China, the written language of stories slowly adapted towards something more people could understand, spreading culture across wide layers of society. Think of a traveler arriving at an inn after a long journey, sitting by the fire, listening as someone reads aloud from a tale of wandering knights or mischievous tricksters. This was as much a part of life as eating or working, and it helped create a sense of shared imagination across the land. Their technology quietly supported these cultural flourishes. Consider printing. Centuries before Gutenberg in Europe, the Chinese were carving woodblocks to press entire pages of text, and later experimenting with movable type. Imagine what it meant to be able to produce books faster, to allow more people to own them, and to let knowledge flow more freely. This innovation was not just a curiosity. It shaped education, governance, and even religion. Buddhist sutras, Confucian classics, manuals for farming, guides for medicine, all could be copied and spread with relative ease. It made the society dynamic, capable of renewal, and resilient against the stagnation that often haunted other civilizations. And resilience was important because life in China was not without hardship. Floods, droughts, and invasions tested the strength of the people constantly. The great rivers, the Yellow River and the Yangtze, gave life with their fertile soils but also destroyed villages with sudden floods. To manage this, the Chinese developed some of the earliest hydraulic engineering projects in history. Massive dikes, canals, and irrigation systems stretched across the landscape, requiring cooperation, planning, and technical skill. These projects not only saved lives, but also taught communities how to work together on scales Europe rarely achieved at the time. It is remarkable to think that while many European peasants struggled with isolated farming, Chinese farmers could rely on networks of water systems that linked entire provinces. All of this gave rise to something subtle but crucial, a culture of order. From the Confucian teachings that shaped family and politics, to the bureaucratic examinations that selected officials, the Chinese created structures that gave stability across centuries. Imagine sitting in a hall, preparing for the imperial examination, knowing that your performance on essays and poems could determine whether you rose to power or remained in obscurity. This system, which emphasized merit and learning, stood in contrast to much of Europe, where birth and inheritance determined one's future more than knowledge or skill. And yet, despite the order, there was also freedom in creativity. Painters captured mountains, rivers, and mist with delicate brushstrokes, while calligraphers turned words into art. Even gardens were designed with a philosophy that blended nature and human touch, with winding paths, rocks placed like sculptures, and ponds that mirrored the sky. To walk in one of these gardens was not simply to admire plants, but to step into a living painting. It is easy to forget how advanced this sense of beauty was compared to the often practical, rough environments of medieval Europe. So when we ask why the Chinese were doing so much better than Europe in so many ways, the answer lies not only in their inventions or their governance, but in the way they lived every day. They ate with refinement, they entertained with imagination, they studied with seriousness, and they built with vision. Their lives were woven together in a pattern that fostered progress. And the more you picture yourself walking among them, passing by a noodle stall, hearing the faint sound of a lute in the distance, or watching the river carry a boat filled with porcelain, the more you realize how far ahead they truly were. If you close your eyes and let yourself wander further into that world, you might imagine the sound of merchants calling from their stalls, the clatter of wooden wheels rolling along stone streets, and the murmur of scholars debating beneath the shade of trees. The Chinese city was not only a place of trade, but also of ideas, where knowledge moved as freely as silk or tea. In Europe, a person's life was often limited to their village, with only rumors of distant lands, but in China a citizen could hear about places thousands of miles away, because caravans arrived regularly with stories of India, Persia, and beyond. The Silk Road was not only a path of goods, it was a highway of culture, where astronomy from Babylon, medicine from the Arab world, and philosophies from India blended into the vast Chinese tapestry. And the people absorbed it, reshaped it, and made it part of their own civilization. Imagine walking along the great markets of the Tang capital, Chang'an, where districts were divided like a chessboard, each one carefully organized, patrolled, and filled with noise and color. Shops overflowed with porcelain so white and thin it looked like it was carved from snow. Lacquerware gleamed with a surface as smooth as glass, and bolts of silk shimmered in every shade of blue, green, and red. And somewhere in the corner of the market you could find a stall selling something unusual. A strange fruit brought from Central Asia, a jewel from India, or a rare herb from Tibet. Europeans at the time, locked in smaller, rougher towns, could not have imagined such abundance, nor the feeling of living in a place that seemed connected to the entire world. And yet, life was not only about splendor. The heartbeat of China came from its farmers, whose labor sustained everything. The rice paddies stretched like mirrors across the valleys, reflecting the sky as farmers bent in lines, planting seedlings by hand. The system of agriculture was so advanced that Chinese yields per acre often surpassed anything in Europe. They used iron tools, developed seed selection, and rotated crops long before Europeans thought systematically about such methods. Villages were linked by canals, which not only watered the fields but also served as highways for boats carrying goods. It meant that even a simple farmer, living in a modest home with clay walls and a thatched roof, was part of a network far larger than himself. And what did such a farmer eat after his work? A meal might include rice or millet, vegetables seasoned with soy sauce, perhaps tofu for protein, and if the family was fortunate, a bit of fish or pork. Compare that to a European peasant eating stale bread, gruel, and salted meat when it was available. The difference was not only in taste, but in nutrition. Generations of balanced diets allowed the Chinese population to remain healthier and grow faster than many European populations, even during times of hardship. It is no coincidence that China supported populations in the tens of millions while much of Europe remained scattered and thinly populated. Entertainment, too, reached even the smallest corners of society. A village might celebrate with festivals where drums thundered and firecrackers burst in bright sparks. Children played with kites, their colorful shapes darting through the sky like birds, while elders gathered to watch plays that mixed comedy, tragedy, and moral lessons. The idea of fireworks is so common today that it feels timeless. But it began in China, where alchemists first discovered how to mix saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal into explosions of light. At first, fireworks were used to frighten away evil spirits, but over time they became part of celebration, turning festivals into dazzling displays of sound and color. Imagine a night sky, long before electricity, suddenly filled with blooms of red and green light, and you can see how magical that must have felt. But the Chinese mind was never content with just wonder. Behind the fireworks was the beginning of something even greater: gunpowder. It was discovered not by generals, but by those same alchemists who sought elixirs of immortality. Their experiments in pursuit of eternal life gave the world one of the most transformative inventions in history. And though in time gunpowder would change warfare across the globe, in early China it showed how curiosity and experimentation could lead to breakthroughs far beyond their original purpose. Europe would one day harness this discovery with devastating effect, but it is important to remember where it began. In quiet workshops where men in robes mixed powders by candlelight, hoping for eternal youth. And yet, even as they experimented with powerful substances, the Chinese also refined gentler sciences. Medicine, for instance, developed into a system that combined observation, philosophy, and practice. Doctors took pulses, examined the body carefully, and prescribed treatments based not only on symptoms but on balance and harmony within the body. Herbal medicine, acupuncture, and massage were practiced with a level of sophistication unknown in Europe for centuries. In Europe, illness was often seen as a punishment from God, to be treated with prayer or crude remedies. In China, illness was studied, catalogued, and addressed with both spiritual and practical approaches. Created a culture where healing was both science and art. And what about leisure? After work, after food, after festivals, what did people do in their free time? Many found joy in games that still exist today. Go, the board game of black and white stones, was played by scholars and generals alike, who saw in its patterns a reflection of strategy and philosophy. Children played with spinning tops, dice, and dolls, while storytellers wandered from town to town, filling evenings with tales of heroes and tricksters. Music, too, was everywhere. A scholar might play the guqin alone in his study, plucking notes that echoed like whispers of nature, while common people gathered for lively songs accompanied by flutes and drums. Life was not silent nor monotonous, but filled with sound, movement, and story. All of this paints a picture of a society that was layered and dynamic, always in motion, always creating. The Chinese world of 1,000 years ago was not a static place, but a river of invention and imagination. And when you compare it to Europe, you see the difference in speed, in openness, and in ambition. Europe had beauty and strength of its own, but its progress was often halted by wars, by rigid traditions, by the weight of institutions that resisted change. In China, change was embraced more readily, not always perfectly, but enough to keep the civilization ahead in ways that shaped not only its own destiny but the destiny of the world. As we drift further along this river of time, imagine the lives of craftsmen and inventors in ancient China, whose hands seemed to hold the secrets of the world. In small workshops, artisans shaped bronze into intricate mirrors, swords, and ritual vessels that reflected both artistry and precision. They worked with iron, casting tools and weapons that were stronger and more effective than most in Europe for centuries. Woodworkers created furniture that was both elegant and functional, with intricate joinery that required no nails, relying instead on the careful interlocking of pieces, a technique that would astonish even modern carpenters. And in the streets, potters shaped clay into porcelain so delicate that it rang like crystal when tapped, yet strong enough to be exported across the Silk Road, reaching distant lands that could hardly comprehend such craftsmanship. It wasn't just about making objects. It was about understanding the principles behind them. Inventors studied balance, motion, and the properties of materials, sometimes guided by philosophies that tied the natural world to human behavior. Water clocks measured time with a precision that amazed observers. Gears and wheels operated mechanisms for irrigation. Bells rang in patterns that controlled temples and government buildings alike. Even toys and automata were designed to teach and entertain, demonstrating principles of motion and mathematics in ways that delighted children and adults. It was a culture where curiosity was not a pastime, but a responsibility, a way to improve both daily life and the larger society. The marketplaces themselves reflected this ingenuity. Vendors did not merely sell goods. They displayed them with flair, attracting attention through clever arrangements, bright colors, and subtle performances. Silk was not just draped. It was folded, twisted, and patterned to demonstrate quality and wealth. Ceramic jars were painted with scenes that told stories or celebrated the seasons, while merchants might recite poems or perform small acts to show off the value of what they were offering. It created a theater of commerce, where buying and selling became an experience in itself, and the city streets were alive with human creativity. Even transportation was advanced. Canals stretched for hundreds of miles, carrying boats loaded with grain, salt, textiles, and tools. Horses and carts followed well-maintained roads, connecting remote regions to the capital. The Grand Canal, a marvel of engineering, linked rivers and allowed commerce and communication across vast distances. It wasn't merely a utility, it shaped society, enabling provinces to specialize in agriculture, crafts, and trade, feeding cities with surplus and knowledge alike. And when you picture the labor required, it becomes clear that this was a society capable of organizing massive projects without the chaos that might have accompanied similar attempts in Europe at the same time. And what did people do with this abundance? Leisure was woven seamlessly into everyday life. The Chinese appreciated beauty in almost every moment. A scholar might stroll through a garden contemplating the shape of rocks, the reflection of clouds and water, and the subtle fragrance of flowers. Children played with kites, spinning tops, and games of strategy, learning balance and foresight. Families gathered for meals that were not hurried or purely functional, but slow, thoughtful, and celebratory. Festivals lit up cities and villages, with music, dance, and fireworks filling the air. In all of this, you can see that entertainment and culture were not separate from daily existence. They were intertwined, making life itself richer and more meaningful. And yet, even in a world so full of beauty, there was discipline. Education was highly valued, and the imperial examination system meant that knowledge and merit could determine one's destiny. Young men studied texts for years, memorizing poetry, philosophy, history, and legal codes, preparing to serve in the bureaucracy. Women, though often limited in certain roles, engaged in arts, weaving, music, and household management, creating a rhythm of life where each person's contribution mattered. Society, in its structure, emphasized responsibility, learning, and balance, creating a foundation that allowed progress to flourish. Religion and philosophy guided much of this life. Confucianism taught respect, hierarchy, and moral conduct, shaping family life and governance. Daoism encouraged harmony with nature, leading to gardens, meditation, and the arts. Buddhism, which traveled from India, offered a spiritual perspective on suffering, life, and compassion. Together, these belief systems created a society where people sought understanding not only of the material world but of their place in it. Temples and shrines were centers of community, education, and culture, and festivals often blended spiritual observance with public celebration. Imagine walking past a temple at dawn, incense smoke curling upward, monks chanting softly, while merchants prepare their stalls nearby and children play in the courtyards. The layers of life coexist, and nothing feels rushed or forced. And in technology, the Chinese continued to surprise the world. Gunpowder, once an experiment for immortality, found its way into fireworks, cannons, and signals. Paper money replaced coins in some regions, showing an understanding of commerce and trust that Europe would struggle to implement for centuries. Compasses guided explorers, ships sailed safely along coasts and rivers, and navigators plotted courses that made trade across oceans possible. Medicine evolved, creating herbal remedies and diagnostic systems that were sophisticated and empirical, often recorded in detailed texts for future generations. Even architecture demonstrated both beauty and engineering. Multi-story pagodas with wooden frameworks survived earthquakes better than European stone towers. Bridges spanned rivers with elegance and strength, and city planning considered drainage, traffic, and aesthetics together. Yet life was also about story and imagination. Folk tales, myths, and legends filled the air, told by wandering performers or passed quietly at home. Some spoke of dragons, phoenixes, or celestial beings, while others chronicled real heroes and clever tricksters. These stories were not only entertainment. They transmitted values, warned of dangers, and inspired creativity. People read and heard these tales across generations, creating a shared cultural consciousness that was vast and enduring. In Europe, storytelling existed, but the scale and integration into daily life were not as pervasive or as systematized. All of this, the cities, the technology, the cuisine, the arts, the philosophy, the education, and the organization, made China a civilization that advanced steadily while much of Europe remained fragmented. And as you listen, picture a typical day unfolding. A farmer tending rice fields at sunrise, a scholar copying texts by candlelight, a child flying a kite in the courtyard, a merchant negotiating over silk at midday, and families gathering to share dumplings and tea at dusk. Each layer interacts with another, forming a society that seems effortless in its complexity, yet required centuries of careful growth and refinement. And in thinking about this, you begin to understand progress is not only measured by inventions, wars won, or kings crowned, but by the daily life of ordinary people, the rhythm of their days, the way they interact with their environment, and the way they pass knowledge from one generation to the next. China, thousands of years ago, had mastered that rhythm, creating a society where technology, culture, and life flowed together like water in a river, persistent, steady, and unbroken. As night deepens in our imagination, we can drift even further into the subtleties of life in ancient China, noticing details that most visitors from Europe could scarcely imagine. Picture a small riverside town, its wooden bridges arching gracefully over the flowing water, lanterns swaying gently in the evening breeze, and the soft hum of conversation floating across the streets. Boats glide along the canals, carrying baskets of vegetables, fresh fish, and sometimes silk bolts, the oars dipping rhythmically in the calm water. Children chase one another along the riverbank, laughing and calling, while nearby, scholars practice calligraphy, dipping brushes into ink and moving them across rice paper with a fluid elegance that seems almost meditative. Every moment of life, even ordinary, carries intention, skill, and a touch of beauty that Europeans would not see in their villages for centuries. And it was not just the external environment that impressed, it was the internal world of the people themselves. Think about education. Families, even those of modest means, often placed great importance on literacy, arithmetic, and moral training. Young students might begin their day before sunrise, chanting Confucian texts or reciting poetry, while their parents prepared breakfast of warm rice porridge with pickled vegetables or freshly steamed buns. The notion of learning as both a duty and a joy was deeply ingrained, allowing society to cultivate generations of thinkers, administrators, and artisans. In Europe, Literacy was often confined to the clergy or nobility, leaving most people unable to read, write, or fully participate in intellectual life. In China, learning flowed more widely, subtly empowering individuals and strengthening communities. Imagine walking into a tea house in the heart of the city, where the scent of jasmine or oolong tea mingles with the faint aroma of roasting chestnuts. Patrons sit on low stools, sipping slowly, listening to a storyteller recount a tale of clever generals, mischievous spirits, or clever merchants. Occasionally, a musician plucks strings on a guqin, the notes soft and lingering, creating an atmosphere that is both calming and stimulating. It is a place of exchange, where ideas, stories, and laughter mix, forming a cultural hub accessible to a broad range of people. In Europe, by contrast, such spaces were rare, often confined to wealthy courts or small guild halls. And then there were the innovations that touched daily life directly. Paper money had been introduced in some regions, allowing merchants to carry value without the burden of heavy coins. Markets operated efficiently, with standardized weights and measures, and traders were often part of organized guilds or associations that regulated quality and practice. Bridges and roads connected towns and villages, not just for commerce, but for social and cultural exchange. Imagine traveling from one city to another, knowing that you can follow canals and roads, cross reliable bridges, and find inns where food, rest, and safety are assured. The level of infrastructure reflects not only practical intelligence, but the foresight to sustain a growing population and economy over centuries. Consider medicine again, for it played a role in shaping society as much as technology or art. Physicians examined pulses, observed symptoms, and prescribed remedies drawn from a vast pharmacopoeia of herbs, minerals, and techniques like acupuncture or moxibustion. A patient suffering from illness would receive treatment that considered the balance of energy within the body, diet, and lifestyle, rather than relying purely on superstition or prayer. This approach allowed a more systematic understanding of health, improving life expectancy and quality of life, and demonstrating that science and philosophy were intertwined in ways Europe would struggle to integrate for generations. At the same time, the Chinese mind was curious, inventive, and playful. Imagine children playing with early toys designed not only for amusement but to teach coordination, strategy, and creativity. Tops spun in the streets, kites soared over fields, and board games like Go encouraged strategic thinking and patience. Festivals combined spectacle with ritual, often featuring firecrackers, lanterns, acrobatics, and music, creating community cohesion and joy that transcended social rank. The delight in art, play, and ingenuity was never separated from life. It flowed naturally alongside work, family, and learning, creating a society in which imagination and practicality coexisted effortlessly. And speaking of imagination, let's wander into the world of Chinese invention again. Gunpowder, first discovered by alchemists seeking immortality, would eventually transform warfare globally, but in its earliest uses it was harmless yet mesmerizing. Fireworks. The Chinese used them to celebrate, to warn, and to enchant, turning the night sky into a canvas of sound and color. Meanwhile, compasses allowed sailors to navigate rivers and seas with confidence, giving China a maritime advantage long before European explorers ventured far from their coasts. Bridges, pagodas, and buildings were constructed with both durability and grace, demonstrating engineering knowledge and artistic sensibility that merged utility and beauty seamlessly. And still, everyday life reflected balance and rhythm. Farmers rose early, worked the fields, and returned home to share meals that were nutritious, varied, and flavorful. Merchants and artisans pursued their crafts with skill and pride, contributing to the vitality of towns and cities. Children learned, played, and observed, absorbing lessons not only from teachers but from the surrounding environment, from the rhythm of the river, the patterns of the stars, and the cycles of the seasons. Families, communities, and even the state operated in layers that reinforced each other. Education, economy, culture, and philosophy all intertwined to form a resilient and dynamic society. Even during hardships, floods, droughts, or political unrest, the society found ways to adapt. Water management systems mitigated floods, granaries stored surplus to feed the population in lean years, and skilled officials administered laws and governance with remarkable continuity. Compare this to the challenges faced in medieval Europe, where famine, fragmented authority, and poor infrastructure often led to stagnation and suffering. In China, the combination of knowledge, organization, and foresight created a civilization that could endure and progress simultaneously. As we continue to wander through the world of ancient China, it is impossible not to notice the rhythm of the seasons, which dictated the pace of life and shaped the very culture of the people. Spring brought renewal, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers and freshly turned earth, farmers preparing paddies for rice seedlings while children ran through meadows chasing butterflies, their laughter mingling with the hum of insects and the distant clatter of wooden carts. Markets were alive with produce, bamboo shoots, spring greens, fresh fish from nearby rivers, and families planned meals that balanced flavors, colors, and nutrition in ways that would make even modern chefs pause with admiration. By summer, the rivers swelled, and canals teemed with boats carrying goods to distant cities. Scholars studied under the shade of trees, and festivals celebrated harvests and river spirits, combining music, dance, and firecrackers in displays that dazzled both the eye and the imagination. The complexity of life in China extended far beyond agriculture and trade, however, into the realms of craft and artistry. Consider the production of silk. Mulberry trees carefully tended, silkworms nurtured in precise conditions, threads spun, dyed, and woven into fabric so fine it felt almost like air. The skill required was immense, passed down through generations, and it created an economy that fueled commerce far beyond China's borders. Pottery and porcelain production, too, reached heights of technical and aesthetic sophistication. Kilns fired at precise temperatures, glazes perfected over decades, and designs that told stories or symbolized luck, prosperity, and virtue. Each item was not only a functional object, but also a testament to centuries of accumulated knowledge and dedication. And life was full of rituals, both small and grand. Meals themselves were carefully orchestrated. Bowls and plates arranged with attention to harmony, flavors balanced between salty, sweet, bitter, sour, and umami. Tea served to cleanse the palate and honor the guests, and conversation flowing not only about business but about literature, philosophy, and current events. Festivals punctuated the year, celebrating lunar milestones, harvests, and religious observances, often combining processions, lanterns, music, and elaborate performances that created a sense of shared experience across social classes. Even in quiet moments, such as tending a garden or walking along a canal at dawn, there was an awareness of beauty and order that permeated everyday life. And yet, there was also ingenuity in the practical. Water management systems spanned provinces, controlling floods, irrigating fields, and connecting communities through canals. Bridges were constructed with curves that distributed weight efficiently, allowing both carts and pedestrians to cross safely. Roads were maintained to facilitate trade and travel, and inns and way stations offered shelter and food for travelers and merchants, creating a network that bound the empire together. In Europe, comparable infrastructure often took centuries to appear, whereas in China, it was integral to daily life, enabling commerce, communication, and cultural exchange at an unprecedented scale. The intellectual life of China was equally impressive. Scholars devoted themselves to philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, and medicine, often seeking patterns in nature that could explain human behavior, the seasons, or celestial movements. Instruments measured time, charts recorded eclipses, and texts cataloged knowledge with precision. Education was highly valued, with examinations determining bureaucratic positions based on merit rather than birth, creating a system that encouraged learning and innovation. Even ordinary people could access knowledge. Books, scrolls, and printed materials spread ideas, stories, and technical skills far beyond the capital, reaching villages and towns, creating a literate and informed populace that could participate in civic and cultural life. And entertainment, of course, continued to weave into everyday existence. Music, performed on instruments such as the pipa, guqin, or bamboo flute, accompanied dances, storytelling, and religious rituals. Street performers amazed crowds with acrobatics, juggling, and puppetry, while festivals transformed cities into theaters of light, sound, and motion. Shadow puppetry, for instance, told moral stories that entertained and instructed, bridging education and amusement in a way that engaged both children and adults. Even games played by the young taught strategy, patience, and skill, blending learning with fun in a seamless manner. Religion and philosophy framed the worldview of the people. Confucian ideals structured family life and governance, emphasizing respect, duty, and moral behavior. Daoist principles encouraged harmony with nature, meditation, and reflection, influencing art, garden design, and personal conduct. Buddhism, having arrived from India centuries earlier, offered a spiritual perspective on suffering, impermanence, and compassion, and its temples became centers of learning, art, and community. These belief systems intertwined, shaping both personal behavior and societal norms, creating a civilization where ethics, spirituality, and daily practice were not separate domains but parts of a coherent whole. And amidst all this, innovation never ceased. Gunpowder evolved from alchemical experiments into fireworks and weapons. Compasses enabled navigation along rivers and seas. Paper and movable type spread knowledge rapidly. Medicine advanced through careful observation and experimentation. Even architecture demonstrated a blend of practicality and beauty. Pagodas rose in multi-tiered splendor, bridges spanned rivers with grace and strength, and urban planning considered traffic, drainage, and aesthetics. Every aspect of life reflected a combination of creativity, knowledge, and foresight, creating a society capable of enduring both time and challenge. Even in ordinary moments, there was a sense of elegance and refinement. Families gathered for meals, sharing not only food but conversation, poetry, and laughter. Craftsmen worked diligently, taking pride in their skill. Children learned through play, observing the world and absorbing lessons from the people and environment around them. Festivals and ceremonies punctuated life, blending joy, spirituality, and social cohesion. Life was not a struggle merely for survival. It was an integrated experience of work, learning, creativity, and celebration. As the morning sun rises over the tiled roofs of an ancient Chinese city, imagine the bustle of daily life awakening with subtle order and efficiency that seems almost magical to outsiders. The air carries scents of freshly baked buns, steaming rice, and the faint aroma of herbal medicine, while merchants sweep the streets and arrange their goods with meticulous care, ready for the day's trade. Farmers, returning from early morning work in the fields, pause at the market to barter for vegetables, spices, or cloth, and children scurry past in bright clothing, carrying baskets or chasing one another with laughter echoing between walls and rooftops. Even the sounds themselves are a harmony. The clatter of carts on stone, the murmur of conversation, the occasional melody of a flute drifting from a tea house or a courtyard garden. And life is layered with refinement that touches every corner of existence. Craftsmen set up workshops, their tools laid out with precision. Wood, bronze, iron, and clay transformed under skilled hands into objects both practical and beautiful. A carpenter shapes a door with elegant joints. A potter fires porcelain to a perfect translucence, and a silkworm farmer checks the leaves of mulberry trees, ensuring that every stage of production meets exacting standards. These ordinary people are not merely surviving. They are elevating daily labor into an art form, creating goods that reflect knowledge accumulated over centuries, combining efficiency with aesthetic grace. Education, too, weaves seamlessly into the rhythm of life. Young students practice writing characters, reciting classical texts, and studying poetry while elders offer guidance, storytelling, and wisdom drawn from experience. This learning is not confined to classrooms or private study. It permeates streets, markets, and gardens. A merchant negotiates contracts while reciting a proverb. A scholar debates philosophy under the shade of a tree, and a child observes both, absorbing knowledge informally as part of daily experience. The Chinese understood that the cultivation of intellect was not separate from life. It was embedded in the very act of living. Food remains central to this intricate world. Markets overflow with fresh vegetables, fish, rice, and spices. Street vendors serve steaming dumplings, rice porridge with pickled vegetables, or skewers of meat flavored with herbs and soy. Tea houses provide respite, where fragrant teas are poured from porcelain cups, and patrons enjoy conversation, poetry, or games like weiqi, known as Go. Even in simple meals, there is thoughtfulness, balance of flavor, texture, and nutrition, harmony of color and presentation, care taken to respect the seasonal availability of ingredients. Compare this to Europe, where much of the population still survives on coarse bread, salted meat, and meager grains, lacking both variety and refinement. And entertainment and leisure are seamlessly integrated into everyday life. Shadow puppetry tells stories of tricksters, heroes, and gods, entertaining children while imparting cultural values. Festivals light the night with lanterns and fireworks, combining spectacle, ritual, and community. Music is everywhere. Flutes, guqin, pipa, and drums accompany dances, ceremonies, and storytelling, creating a sensory tapestry that engages mind and body simultaneously. Even games played by children teach strategy, observation, and creativity, reflecting the subtle integration of education into play. Meanwhile, innovation continues in the background, quietly reshaping the world. Gunpowder, discovered in the search for immortality, creates fireworks and eventually changes the nature of warfare. The compass guides merchants, travelers, and sailors along rivers and seas. Paper, printing, and movable type allow ideas, stories, and technical knowledge to spread rapidly. Bridges and roads, meticulously constructed, connect cities, villages, and provinces, supporting trade, communication, and cultural exchange. Medicine evolves, combining herbal remedies, acupuncture, and careful observation into systems that improve health and longevity. Even architecture demonstrates a union of engineering and aesthetics. Pagodas rise in layered splendor, wooden structures flex with earthquakes, and canals carry goods efficiently across great distances. Imagine, for a moment, a single day in this civilization. A farmer rises before dawn to tend rice fields, checking irrigation canals and guiding oxen through paddy rows. A scholar begins copying texts, practicing calligraphy with patient concentration, while a merchant prepares silk bolts and spices for the morning market. Children chase one another through courtyards, learning social rules, coordination, and strategy through play. In the evening, families gather for meals, sharing both food and conversation, reflecting on the day, reading poetry, or listening to music. Festivals, when they occur, transform towns and cities with music, dance, acrobatics, and fireworks, blending public spectacle with personal delight. The society's organization reflects foresight and planning that seems almost effortless. Officials oversee water management, flood control, and infrastructure projects that protect farmland and towns, allowing commerce and life to continue with minimal disruption. Education and examinations cultivate capable administrators who enforce laws fairly and consistently. Philosophical and religious systems provide moral guidance while supporting art, science, and daily conduct. Every element, from the smallest act of craftsmanship to the vast network of canals, contributes to the resilience, productivity, and creativity of the civilization. And yet, even amidst such structure, creativity and imagination flourish. Gardens are designed as living paintings, with ponds, rocks, and carefully arranged flora creating harmony with nature. Artists paint scrolls depicting landscapes, flora, fauna, and human activity, capturing both reality and philosophy. Writers compose novels, poems, and historical chronicles that entertain, instruct, and preserve memory. Music and theater animate communities, merging performance with moral and cultural lessons. Even technology carries elegance. Water clocks, gears, and mechanical devices demonstrate both utility and beauty. As we continue to wander deeper into the streets and villages of ancient China, imagine the subtle interactions between people that shaped not only society but the very character of the civilization. In a bustling market, a silk merchant haggles over the price of fine cloth, while a scholar pauses to examine a scroll depicting a landscape with mountains, rivers, and tiny figures moving along winding paths. A mother guides her child through the crowd, balancing a basket of food on one arm and holding the child's hand with the other, while a street performer entertains passers-by with acrobatics and clever illusions. Every gesture, every movement, every conversation carries intention and meaning, creating a living network of human activity that seems almost choreographed yet spontaneous, ordinary yet extraordinary. Food, as always, is central to life, but it is never merely functional. Families gather to share meals that are carefully prepared, balancing flavors, textures, and nutrients, often incorporating rice, vegetables, tofu, fish, and occasionally meat. Condiments like soy sauce, fermented bean paste, and various spices elevate ordinary ingredients into nuanced dishes, and the careful preparation of tea offers both refreshment and ritual. Compare this to contemporary Europe, where peasants subsist on bread, gruel, and salted meat, often lacking variety or seasoning, and it becomes clear how daily life in China was infused with refinement, care, and an understanding of nourishment that combined health, flavor, and cultural expression. Education continues to play a critical role. Children learn not only reading and writing but moral philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and history, guided by teachers, elders, and even the environment itself. Texts circulate widely, knowledge is recorded meticulously, and examinations determine the path of talented young men, ensuring that merit, rather than birth alone, shapes social mobility. Even artisans and merchants absorb lessons indirectly. Patterns in markets, careful calculation in trade, observation of celestial events, and the rhythms of farming all teach practical mathematics, strategy, and logic. Learning permeates life, making the society resilient, adaptive, and innovative. Entertainment, too, is woven seamlessly into daily existence. Street performances, shadow puppetry, music, and games engage people of all ages and classes. Festivals transform cities with lanterns, fireworks, drums, and dance, blending ritual with communal joy. Children play strategy games that teach patience and foresight, while adults gather to enjoy poetry, music, and storytelling. This integration of leisure, culture, and education strengthens both individual minds and the fabric of society, creating a shared rhythm of life that sustains creativity, cooperation, and cultural continuity. Innovation flows quietly through the civilization, often appearing in unexpected ways. Gunpowder, initially discovered by alchemists searching for immortality, is used in fireworks and later transformed into military technology. The compass allows navigation of rivers and seas, supporting trade, exploration, and communication. Paper, printing, and movable type spread ideas, facilitating education and administration. Architectural design merges engineering with aesthetic vision. Multi-story pagodas flex with earthquakes, bridges span rivers with elegance and durability, and city layouts consider traffic, drainage, and social function simultaneously. Even toys and automata reflect principles of mechanics and design, blending play with learning. Medicine, too, is sophisticated and integrated into life. Herbal remedies, acupuncture, and detailed diagnostic techniques allow treatment that considers both symptoms and overall balance within the body. Physicians record observations meticulously, drawing from centuries of accumulated knowledge, and treatments are tailored to both the individual and the season. This approach improves health and longevity, offering a level of systematic medical care far ahead of contemporary European practices, where superstition and rudimentary remedies dominate. Religion and philosophy underpin daily life, providing ethical guidance, spiritual understanding, and practical wisdom. Confucian principles shape family relations, social hierarchy, and governance. Daoist ideals encourage harmony with nature, meditation, and reflection, influencing gardens, architecture, and lifestyle. Buddhism offers insight into suffering, impermanence, and compassion, while temples and monasteries become centers for education, art, and community activity. The coexistence of multiple belief systems fosters a balanced, flexible, and culturally rich society. Even the smallest moments are filled with artistry and awareness. A gardener arranges rocks, plants, and water features in a pattern that reflects philosophy, balance, and aesthetic judgment. An artisan paints scrolls depicting mountains, rivers, and human activity, blending realism with symbolism. Music flows from courtyards, tea houses, and temples, accompanying conversation, meditation, and play. Every element of life demonstrates attention, intention, and integration, creating a civilization that elevates ordinary experiences into a continuous practice of beauty, learning, and efficiency. Infrastructure continues to impress. Canals, roads, and bridges connect cities and villages, facilitating commerce, communication, and cultural exchange. Inns and way stations support travelers, merchants, and officials, maintaining continuity across vast distances. Water management systems prevent floods, irrigate farmland, and sustain dense populations, demonstrating advanced engineering, foresight, and coordination. In contrast, Europe struggles with fragmented authority, poor infrastructure, and frequent famine, highlighting the advantages of China's integrated, organized, and foresight society. As we move further into the daily life of ancient China, it becomes clear that the sophistication of this civilization was not limited to grand inventions or monumental architecture. It extended into the smallest details of human experience, shaping habits, culture, and perception in ways both subtle and profound. Imagine strolling along a river at dawn, the mist rising from the water as fishermen cast their nets, the reflection of wooden boats rippling gently in the calm current. Farmers prepare their fields with precision, measuring water levels, guiding oxen through the paddies, and planting seedlings with care that ensures maximum yield. Villagers carry baskets of fresh vegetables, herbs, and fruits to the market, where the air is alive with the sense of spices, baked goods, and tea leaves. Even in such seemingly ordinary moments, there is an elegance and intention woven into every action, a combination of practicality and aesthetic sensibility that elevates daily life. Food preparation is a perfect example of this integration of utility, culture, and artistry. Steaming baskets of buns release delicate aromas, rice porridge is served with pickled vegetables, and fish is cooked with seasonings that highlight natural flavors without overwhelming them. Tea is not simply a beverage, it is ritualized, served with deliberate gestures that honor guests and mark transitions in the day. Meals are shared with conversation, poetry, and observation of seasonal changes, reflecting a culture that understands nourishment as both physical and social. In Europe at the same time, many people subsist on coarse bread, salted meat, or gruel, often lacking variety, flavor, or the social rituals that make eating a shared cultural experience. Education permeates life as naturally as the air itself. Children study characters, poetry, philosophy, and arithmetic while observing the patterns of nature, commerce, and human interaction around them. Young scholars memorize Confucian classics, practice calligraphy, and engage in debates that hone reasoning and rhetoric. Even artisans and merchants absorb learning through experience, calculating trade, observing celestial events, or experimenting with materials. Knowledge is not isolated to classrooms. It flows through streets, homes, and workplaces, embedding intellectual curiosity into daily existence. The integration of education with life ensures that skills, wisdom, and cultural memory are passed seamlessly from one generation to the next. Entertainment, play, and cultural expression are equally intertwined with the rhythms of daily life. Children play strategy games that teach foresight and patience, while adults gather in tea houses or courtyards to enjoy music, poetry, or storytelling. Street performers captivate audiences with acrobatics, juggling, and shadow puppetry, blending amusement with instruction. Festivals punctuate the year, lighting streets with lanterns, filling skies with fireworks, and combining dance, music, and communal celebration. In this society, leisure is not an escape from life. It is part of the ongoing cultivation of mind, body, and community, reinforcing social cohesion and human creativity. Technology and innovation continue to permeate existence in ways both visible and subtle. Gunpowder, initially discovered in alchemical experiments for immortality, finds early use in fireworks, while its eventual application in weaponry transforms the art of defense and warfare. The compass enables navigation of rivers and seas, supporting trade, exploration, and communication across vast distances. Paper, printing, and movable type spread knowledge rapidly, allowing literature, technical manuals, and administrative texts to circulate widely, empowering both officials and ordinary people. Bridges, roads, and canals are not only functional but engineered with precision, supporting commerce, travel, and the flow of culture throughout the empire. Even toys, clocks, and mechanical devices demonstrate ingenuity, blending play, learning, and practical application in ways that reflect a deep understanding of physics and human behavior. Medicine, too, demonstrates a sophisticated grasp of both observation and systematic practice. Physicians combine herbal remedies, acupuncture, and diagnostic methods to treat illness, considering both symptoms and overall balance within the body. Treatments are recorded meticulously, tested over generations, and refined through careful observation, ensuring both efficacy and safety. In Europe, at the same time, medical knowledge is often rudimentary, superstition-driven, and inaccessible to most of the population, highlighting the forward-thinking nature of Chinese medical practice. Architecture and urban planning reflect both utility and artistry. Pagodas rise in layered splendor, wooden frameworks flexing to survive earthquakes. Bridges span rivers with grace, Roads connect villages and cities efficiently, and urban layouts consider traffic, drainage, trade, and aesthetics. Gardens are designed with philosophy and harmony in mind, blending water, rock, flora, and space to create contemplative beauty. Even humble homes are arranged with attention to light, airflow, and balance, demonstrating a cultural understanding that environment shapes both physical comfort and mental clarity. Religion and philosophy guide everyday life, reinforcing moral, ethical, and spiritual frameworks. Confucianism emphasizes duty, family, and social harmony. Daoism promotes balance with nature and reflection, and Buddhism offers insight into suffering, compassion, and impermanence. Temples and monasteries serve as centers of art, education, and community, creating spaces where learning, spirituality, and creativity coexist seamlessly. Festivals, rituals, and ceremonies embody these beliefs, blending the practical with the symbolic, the everyday with the extraordinary. As we drift further into the life of ancient China, it is impossible not to notice the subtle elegance that permeates even the smallest details of everyday existence, as if the entire civilization moves to a rhythm carefully tuned over centuries. Imagine walking through a bustling town at midday, the streets alive with vendors displaying colorful fabrics, fragrant herbs, fresh vegetables, and delicately prepared snacks. Children run between stalls, laughing, their tiny hands brushing against baskets of fruit or bundles of noodles. A scholar sits under the shade of a blossoming tree, ink and brush in hand, copying characters onto fine paper, while nearby, a potter spins a wheel, shaping porcelain with patient precision, the faint clinking of tools marking a quiet melody of labor. In every action, there is intention and care, a combination of utility, beauty, and rhythm that creates an environment as harmonious as it is practical. Food, as always, forms a central thread in daily life, yet it is never simply sustenance. It is ritual, art, and culture intertwined. Street vendors sell steamed buns filled with savory or sweet fillings, dumplings glistening with careful folds, and rice porridge accompanied by pickled vegetables or fresh herbs. Tea houses offer refuge from the sun, where patrons savor jasmine, oolong, or green tea, enjoying conversation, poetry, and the soft sounds of guqin or bamboo flutes drifting from open windows. Meals are shared communally, with attention to harmony of flavor, texture, and color, reflecting an understanding that nourishment is both physical and social, both practical and aesthetic. In Europe at the same time, most common folk survive on coarse bread, salted meat, or porridge, with little consideration for balance, variety, or enjoyment, highlighting the sophistication embedded in Chinese daily practice. Education is seamlessly integrated into life at every level. Children memorize Confucian classics, practice calligraphy, and learn arithmetic and poetry, while observing commerce, nature, and social interaction around them, absorbing lessons both formal and informal. Artisans and merchants acquire knowledge through observation and practice, measuring materials, calculating trade, noting patterns in water, weather, or celestial movement. Even casual interactions serve as teaching moments. A proverb shared between neighbors or advice from an elder conveys wisdom while strengthening community bonds. Knowledge is not restricted to scholars. It flows through the streets, marketplaces, and homes, embedding literacy, skill, and ethical understanding into daily life. Entertainment, play, and cultural engagement are equally pervasive. Children engage in strategy games, which cultivate patience, foresight, and problem-solving skills, while adults participate in storytelling, music, or calligraphy. Street performers captivate crowds with acrobatics, juggling, and shadow puppetry, blending amusement with moral or philosophical lessons. Festivals punctuate the year, transforming urban spaces into arenas of communal joy, with lanterns, fireworks, drums, and dances creating a sense of shared wonder and collective identity. Leisure is never separate from life. It is intertwined with learning, art, and social cohesion, reinforcing both individual and societal growth. Innovation is omnipresent, often hidden in plain sight yet shaping life profoundly. Gunpowder, discovered in the search for immortality, produces early fireworks and later transforms warfare. The compass allows sailors and merchants to navigate rivers, lakes, and seas with reliability, expanding trade networks and cultural exchange. Paper, printing, and movable type enable rapid dissemination of knowledge, making education and administration more efficient. Bridges, roads, and canals facilitate commerce and communication while reflecting meticulous engineering and aesthetic sensibility. Even toys and simple mechanical devices embody principles of physics and design, turning play into both entertainment and instruction. Medicine demonstrates remarkable sophistication. Physicians employ herbal remedies, acupuncture, and diagnostic techniques that consider both symptoms and the body's overall balance. Treatments are recorded, refined, and tested over generations, improving health outcomes and longevity. European medicine at the time, often reliant on superstition or rudimentary methods, lacks this systematic approach, emphasizing the advanced state of Chinese scientific and practical knowledge. Architecture and urban design embody the same combination of utility and artistry. Pagodas rise gracefully with structural ingenuity, bridges span rivers with elegance, and homes are arranged with consideration for airflow, light, and spatial harmony. Gardens reflect philosophy and aesthetics, combining rocks, water, and plants into contemplative landscapes that promote reflection and mental clarity. Even the humblest dwellings demonstrate awareness of balance and order, emphasizing that the environment itself is a teacher, shaping behavior, thought, and well-being. Religion and philosophy continue to guide daily existence. Confucian ideals govern family, social hierarchy, and ethics. Daoist principles foster harmony with nature and self-reflection. And Buddhism provides insight into suffering, impermanence, and compassion. Temples and monasteries serve as centers of art, scholarship, and community, blending spirituality with intellectual and social life. Festivals, rituals, and ceremonies intertwine these belief systems with ordinary activities, creating a seamless integration of moral, practical, and aesthetic experience. Even ordinary moments shine with elegance and awareness. Farmers tend fields with meticulous care, observing water flow, soil quality, and weather patterns. Artisans perfect each stroke, fold, or joint in their work. Children learn through play, observing adults, and engaging with tools, games, and music. Families gather for meals and conversation, reflecting, planning, or simply enjoying shared company. Festivals and celebrations infuse joy and creativity into communal life, connecting generations and reinforcing cultural identity.